Well, hey, man, it's great to meet you. I love your story. Thank you for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I want to begin our journey into your world and your
Mhm.
story by asking you this. Living through COVID was a big deal, and it was a shapeshifter for a lot of reasons for all of our lives. There were so many things that were rearranged.
Mhm.
Living and surviving through that time period, how did that influence and affect the way that you do things today?
Well, for writing the book,
Yeah,
it gave me more time to write the book, that's for sure.
yeah,
Not having to do commutes and all that, so that gave me a lot of free time. But for the military, because I am in the military,
yeah.
um, it, we had some teleworking going on and so on, but for the most part, we had missions that we still had to do, so we still had to do a lot of our things in person, wearing masks and social distancing and so on. So it really didn't have a huge effect. My wife, she got to work from home for a really long time. She's a federal employee, so military spouse, so she still should probably get to work from home, continue moving forward. But I think that was probably the only change is that she was working from home for a very long time. Where I was kind of in and out. When we had to do certain missions, we would go in. When we didn't, then we would stay home and telework. But it really wasn't a drastic impact on
Yeah.
us. I will say that at the time we did not have a kid, and now we have a 3-year-old.
Yeah.
We're about to be 3 in March, and I cannot imagine trying to work and not having daycare or anything like that. I know a lot of my peers, they had kids at home and so on. So in our meetings, you could hear them chattering on in the background. And I really didn't realize how challenging it was for them until now, where we get like a snow day for tomorrow and his daycare's closed and I'm still expected to work and he's pulling on my leg. So
Yeah.
I think it would have been a lot more challenging for me had I had a child at that point.
Absolutely. So let's
Mhm.
get into exactly what you do right now for a living. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids. It's career day. And the kid in the
Sure.
back of the room is like, hey, what do you do for a living? How do you answer them?
Yeah, so that would be a hard one to answer. So right now I'm in the Army. I'm an officer in the Army. Well, obviously, anything I say here is just, my own opinion. It's not official Army policy, DoD, government policy, anything like that. It's just my opinion. But so what I do right now is I am stationed at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, about 40 minutes outside of Kansas City, and I'm an instructor at the Command and General Staff College. And what we do there is we train young captains and majors. We train them basically how to be lieutenant colonels, so how to be field grade officers. So that's basically what I do. So if I had to explain it to a layperson, I would say I'm an Army teacher, and I teach Army officers how to be in the Army at a higher level.
So when you were a kid, was the dream always to get in the military, or what was your dream? What was your ideal life?
Yeah, when I was a kid, so that's pretty much kind of what the book is about because my dad, he was in Vietnam. He spent about 2 years in the Army, 1 year in Vietnam with the 82nd Airborne, and then advising the South Vietnamese Army as an ARVN advisor. And so really, he did not talk about it a lot,
Yeah.
but that was always kind of in the background that he had been in the Army. There were like medals and things kind of laying around, tucked away in dusty corners. And as a kid, you like to go through all your parents' stuff when they're not around. So you would find these medals, and you would find old Army fatigues and hats and things like that. And you really didn't know what it was about, but you knew it was something, and it was something to do with a war, but you really didn't know what a war was. All you had was like movies like Rambo and Missing in Action and those type of corny 80s movies at the time. So you really didn't know what that was, but that was always in the background that my dad had been in the Army. There's a couple stories here and there, and that's really what kind of motivated me to then want to be in the Army, to be like him, basically follow in his footsteps. And then as I spent, so many years in the Army, I kind of wanted to know more about his experience in Vietnam, and that's what kicked off writing the book. So yeah, it was always in the background, kind of unspoken.
Yeah.
Maybe I would follow in his footsteps just because of all that influence that was always there.
You know, the interesting thing about military life is that there's this idea that Hollywood gives us for those of us that haven't been in the civilian force. But then there's the reality of it. What was the most surprising thing when you initially decided, this is my life, I'm getting in the military? What was the most surprising thing about getting in and being a part of that world?
Mhm. Yeah, I think the most surprising thing is, and I don't want to say it in a bad way, but you kind of lose some of your freedoms. And I don't necessarily mean that. negatively, like I'm talking bad about the army or anything, because I'm not. But when I was an enlisted soldier, living in the barracks with the 101st Airborne, I mean, you don't even have a fridge. So like there's no like you can't just go and get snacks, you can't just walk down and I'm gonna go to the cupboard and I'm gonna get some cookies or whatever it is. So you kind of lose that a little bit of that personal freedom. You have to eat when they're gonna serve you. Things like that. You sign a contract, you raise your hand, you swear to certain things, and they have you for a certain amount of time. So it's not like a regular job where you can just say, you know what, I just want to quit. I'm done. Here's my 2 week notice. I'm going home. You can do that, but then you get, a dishonorable discharge and things like that that stay on your record forever. So I think that was probably the most shocking thing is some of that loss of freedom. But on the flip side of that, some of the things that you get makes up for it. So when I was a young soldier, 18, 19-year-old soldier, I mean, I had a place to live, I had a steady paycheck, I had 3 hot meals a day, I had money for uniform, I mean, I was taken care of, and not coming from a lot of money. That was a huge thing, that I was like, man, I have safety, I have security, a roof over my head, I got good food every day. So kind of that loss of freedom, but at the same time, you gain that security and that family as well, and how close you grow to everybody that's in your unit and so on. So it's kind of a double-edged, sword, if you will.
Yeah. So writing this book, now that it's done, it's physical, it's in your hands. When you think
Hmm.
about the process, because it's an enormous process to write a
It
book,
is.
from the
Hmm.
beginning thinking to actually getting it to fruition, what was
Hmm.
the journey like for you? Was it cathartic? Was it battling or confronting things that you didn't confront before? What was the process like for you?
Hmm. Yeah, it was getting to that confronting piece, hold off on that for a second, but starting the process, I was just looking through, preparing to talk to you. I was kind of looking through some of my old notes and so on. And I came across the first product that I created to start the book. And that was an Excel spreadsheet where my dad kind of, balled some names at me that he still remembered from his time in the army and so on. So I wrote all those down in that Excel spreadsheet and with the intent of I'm going to try to find these people. As I look at that and I think back to that was about 3.5 years ago, and I'm like, man, that was what started it. And when I first did that Excel spreadsheet in my back of my head, I was like, all right, there's no way I'm going to be able to find any of these people, do any of this, actually, create a book out of this. One, create the book, and then two, maybe have anybody that actually wants to read it. But getting to that confronting piece, it wasn't so much for me because the book is basically about my father's experience in Vietnam. He kept all of his letters that he wrote home, or my grandmother did actually, and I got them. He kept a diary, and so on. So I got all of that. The book is basically about his year in Vietnam compared in contrast to my year in Iraq, and how his experience, influenced me to then join the army and so on, like we just talked about. And then the similarities between the two wars, which are quite striking, which I try to bring out in the book. And then throughout the book, I discuss a whole number of topics that, are always in the news today and were in the news during Vietnam as well. And that's like suicide, women in the military, recruiting, retention, all those type of hot topic issues, which we think are new, which are not, which are being discussed at the same time in Vietnam. But getting back to that confronting question, when I was reaching out to all the people that he served with, and it's amazing what you can find on social media, which is basically how I found a lot of these guys. Um, they really had to kind of confront some things they had not thought or talked about in a really long time when they were reflecting back on their Vietnam experience. And a lot of them were very open with me, and I appreciated that, kind of bringing some of those things outside of the closet, some of those uncomfortable topics that they witnessed and so on in Vietnam. Some did not want to talk to me at all, which I understand completely and respect. So more, I think it was for them that I interviewed, and I interviewed a lot of family members of people that my father knew who were killed in the war and so on. So really ripped off some band-aids, I think, for a lot of them. But I think for a lot of them, it was also very therapeutic, which you kind of brought up, to be able to talk about their loved one after 50 something years, and then knowing that, hey, their name is now going to be enshrined in this book forever. There's a story about them. Though the book's not about their loved one, there's still going to be, 2 or 3 paragraphs about them that's forever going to always be there. So that was kind of, I think, the most interesting part. And then I was able to connect old buddies too, people who hadn't talked in 50 years, being
Yeah.
able to reconnect them as well, which is also really special.
So the one thing about being in the military is there's a lot of people that look up to you as a hero. But
Mhm.
for you, who is that hero? Who is that inspirational force that has made you who you are?
Well, yeah, definitely my father,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, it was definitely him. Him and his Vietnam experience, I mean, that was just, one little part of his life, 2 years of his life. And then, I was born, decade after that, after he left Vietnam in 1978. So, but after that, and he still is, he's a great person and part of his community, part of his church and part of his Alliance Club that he runs with and all those types of things, always giving back, very humble person. If you didn't know him, you would never, if you didn't realize his Vietnam experience, you would not know that he was a Bronze Star with Valor winner and all those types of things from his time in the war. So definitely he was always kind of been that rock and kind of that role model of what a good man should look like. A humble, hardworking family person who tries to raise his family the best he can and give back to his community the best he can at the same time.
So if you can meet anybody, a decorated military leader, whether they
Hmm.
are alive today or even a ghost, and you could talk to them and see just kind of a little insight into how they think, who would that
Yeah.
be?
Oh man. Maybe, I mean, I hate to be cliche, but maybe Patton.
Yeah.
And I think because, Patton's such a interesting figure in history. The reason I would want to meet him is to look at him today and be like, hey, in today's environment, would you have ever made general? I don't think he ever would. I think he don't think he would ever made it past lieutenant, probably.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an interesting figure. But I mean, there's all kind. I really enjoyed the Civil War, so there'd be all kinds of Civil War figures that I would definitely love to talk to. Um, but yeah, I think Patton would probably come top of my list just for that reason.
So as an author, what was the book for you when you were a kid growing up? What was the book that you loved and to this day you
Hmm.
hold in high regard?
Yeah, so, my dad is always reading. He reads a lot. He's actually a PhD in geography, but he loves to read, and so he was always reading about Vietnam.
Yeah.
And I never knew, what that was. And so as a kid, he's leaving these books around. I'm picking them up. They're a little over my head, obviously, when you're like 10, 11 years old, but I'm trying to read them. I'm looking at the pictures and so on. So I would say, all of those military books, he was always reading military history and so on. So all of those books really influenced me heavily. Um, and some of those books, he gave to me for the book that I wrote, that I could use as source material and so on. So I don't think there's any, one particular book maybe. Um, one of the books I really remember is Dale Dye. I don't know if you know him.
I've heard the name.
Uh, yeah, famous Vietnam veteran actor. He was in Platoon, all those types of things,
Yeah.
those movies. Yeah. So he actually wrote an endorsement for my book, and he was one of the books that I remember reading as a kid. His Run Between the Raindrops book. And I mentioned that to him when I was able to reach out to him, and so he wrote an endorsement for my book, which is really awesome.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. What has been your prime motivator all these years? What gets you up in the morning? What has gotten you to write this book and to promote it? What has been that motivating force for you?
Yeah, I think, so Vietnam, it's very controversial, obviously, still even to today. The echoes of Vietnam have never gone away. And that's really, spell that out in the book. All of our foreign policy today, Vietnam is always lurking in the background. What happened there, a whole bunch of different reasons. You can argue all the types of different reasons of why Vietnam is still that influencer, but it influenced the way that we fought in Iraq and Afghanistan as well. We no way wanted to commit that amount of troops that we did in Vietnam and have that casualty count that we did, 58,000 from Vietnam versus, 5, 6,000 from our wars. So it really influenced how we do foreign policy, and it still does today. And now you tag on Iraq and Afghanistan onto that foreign policy from that Vietnam ghost, and all of that is going to influence how we do foreign policy for years moving forward. So, um, what motivated me really was to try to tell a different perspective of the Vietnam War, to try to tell a more humanistic perspective of it, from those who served. And then what kept me writing it is, with each person that I found to interview and how I guess how it made them feel that somebody wanted to talk to them about, their little part in history, their little part in the Vietnam War, which nobody wants to talk about. Everybody wants to talk about World War II, World War One, the big wars, the big, we were fighting the Nazis and so on, but nobody wants to talk about it, Vietnam. And I worry that my wars, Iraq, Afghanistan, is going to be the same way in 20 years from now, is that nobody's going to want to talk about those dirty little wars as well.
Yeah.
So just seeing how special people felt when I was talking to them and wanting to hear their story and tell their story, that really motivated me. And then also my son, my son was born during the time that I was writing the book. So I really wanted to have something for him as well that talked about his grandfather and my experience in the army, because maybe that would influence him, whether he wants to join or not. And then obviously my father, he's 80 years old, so I wanted to get the book done, he before he passed away and so on, so I could get to know him better as well.
Yeah. So what's your
Mhm.
perspective on your son? Are you going to
Mhm.
be um like are you going to lean him towards that life of being in the military, or what's your philosophy on that?
Yeah, no, so that's interesting because, in the book, the dedication in the book says, for my son Tommy, you need not follow in our footsteps, and then I put, dot, 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 unless you want to.
Yeah.
So, I'm not going to heavily influence him one way or the other. But there's no way that he's not going to be influenced by it.
Yeah.
I should be long retired by the time he really knows what's going on. So we're not going to be on military bases anymore. But still, I mean, you just look at the background. I mean, this stuff's going to be laying around,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Um, I've got a chest behind me that's got all my dad's Vietnam stuff and got my Iraq stuff, so that's always going to be around. And it's always going to be in the background. And if it's something that he wants to do, I'll support him. If it's something he doesn't want to do, then that's perfectly fine as well. I just want him to be happy, safe, and have a secure life. And whatever he wants to do, I'll love him either way.
So speaking of youth, if you
Mhm.
had a dream tonight,
Mhm.
you ran into that version of you before you got enlisted, and you can give that
Mhm.
young version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've led, the wisdom you've accumulated. What
Mhm.
advice would you give your younger self?
Yeah, it's the same advice I give any 17, 16, 17-year-old right now that doesn't know, what they want to do yet. They're in high school, they're still trying to figure out, do they want to go to college? Do they want to just get a job? Do they want to go to a tech school? They just have no idea. I would tell me then, and any 17, 18-year-old now is just, look at the military. Don't believe all the bad stuff you hear because you hear a lot of bad stuff in the news about, bad bad dining facilities and horrible barracks and all these types of other things. That's just the outlying cases. They really the military really does do a good job of taking care of our young men and women who join. And I would say my biggest advice is, if you don't know what you want to do, go join the military for 3 years. Get that GI Bill.
Yeah,
You can use the GI Bill not just for college anymore. You can also use it in trade schools.
yeah,
So get that in your have that in your back pocket. If you don't use it, you don't use it. But at least you have it.
yeah.
And in those 3 years for your initial enlistment, save money. I mean, you can walk out of there with a lot of money if you save it well. You're living in the barracks. And while you're also there, make the army work for you. So pick a job that's something you're interested in, whether it's computer. I did infantry just because, I didn't score very well on the test at the time, and it was all I could do. And my dad was infantry, so that's what I did. But if you want to do that too, you want to kick indoors and jump out of planes and things like that, then absolutely do it. But if you want to learn a skill or a trade, get the military to work for you. So that's my biggest advice is, you don't know what you want to do in your life, go take a 3-year hiatus, if you will, save a bunch of money, make the military work for you, teach them a trade or a skill that you can use, save money while you're there, get that GI Bill. And then when you come out, you've got all that in your back pocket. You've seen some of the world, you have all kinds of experiences and so on. Makes you so much more marketable. It helps you kind of hone in what you want, whether you want to stay in your hometown or you want to move to a big city. That's going to give you that security blanket to do it with that savings and that GI Bill and all that. So that would be my advice to my old self: is make the army work more for you, as well as any young person.
My dad was in the Air Force. He was born in
Nice.
Brooklyn and raised in Long Island. He got stationed at Richards Gebaur.
Okay.
And I think about later in his life, he needed all those medical benefits to the VA and how
Mhm. Yeah.
indispensable. I mean, just the benefits and how they took care of him was
Yep.
absolutely necessary. So I think about those things, just like you
Mm-hmm.
said. I mean,
Yep.
even if you don't make it a career, the fact that you have all of that behind you is so big.
Mm-hmm. It is. The benefits are huge. You've got the VA benefits, which are awesome, obviously. But you've also got other benefits too. You've got stuff that goes through the Department of Labor to help you find jobs and things like that. There's a transition program in the Army that helps you, after or in the military after your initial enlistment, that helps you, build out resumes, get interviews, find jobs. There's all kinds of stuff. And if you stay for the whole time, the new blended retirement system, and you walk away with a big 401k and all those types of things. So yeah, it's huge. It really is. Um,
Yeah, totally. So let me ask you this. Of everything that you've done with your career and writing this book and being a family guy, of everything in your life, what are you ultimately the proudest of?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, I'm proud for, my family and all the things my wife's done to support my career, moving all around the all around the country every couple of years. Um, Definitely proud of the book, definitely proud of everything that, our family has achieved, and what we've built for our son so that he's really going to have a good life, when he gets older and grows up and so on. So I don't think there's any really one thing that I'm really proud of. I think it's the collective,
Yeah,
the partnership my wife and I did and how we really worked together, worked hard. She actually, like I was talking to her about this podcast, now that I'm really starting to promote the book, you're actually my first podcast to promote the book.
excellent.
And I'm like, hey, I need like a cool background. You know what I mean? We need like something to look cool. We don't want like a broom closet in the background.
Yeah,
So she actually did all this morning
very cool.
and hung it all up. So, those types of partnerships that we have and supporting each other. And I could never do this. Like she's all about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's what I'm most proud of, I think.
What's the best advice you've ever gotten?
Mm. I think the best advice is that same one I just gave is make whatever you're doing work for you. Make the army work for you. And I think so. Make whatever you decide to pursue, make it work for you. Don't just you want to be a giver. Obviously, you want to give your time and your hard work and your leadership and all those types of things. But you also want to get things back for you. And not saying that in a selfish way, but the only person who's going to take care of you is you, right? So you've got to figure out that two-way street where you're not just giving all the time, but you're also getting things out of it as well. And I would say the second biggest piece of advice I've ever gotten is make people tell you no. And so I've never been afraid to try to do things, to reach out to people, to try to get mentorship or whatever to help write the book or be successful in the military or whatever I'm doing in life because you just got to reach out to people, and if they say no, they say no, right? If they ignore you, I mean, who cares, So people are always like, oh, I don't want to reach out to them, they're never going to respond to me, things like that. Like I reached out to Dale Dye, I never thought he'd respond to me, and he did, So you never know. So I would say that second, biggest piece of advice that I got has helped me in my life is just make people tell you no. You don't have to be rude about it, just ask, hey, would you have some time to discuss, whatever with me or etc. And if they say no, then okay, no big deal.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
It's 50-50.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, Patrick, everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, everyone you work with, everyone that buys your book, but you run the show. What's your
Mhm.
perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Oh wow. Yeah, I think I try to be a humble person. I try to work hard and be successful, but try to just be a humble, professional, good person. And I think those are the kind of the three lessons I learned from my father. Hard work, humility, um, but just also be giving at the same time, and being professional at the same time. I would hope that's how people would describe me.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me
Yeah.
ask you this. If anyone wants to pick up a copy of the book, they want to
Mhm.
reach out, they have questions, they want to know more, anything in your world, where can they go?
So I have a website. It's patnaughton.com. So PAT and then my last name Naughton, which is N as in November, and then AUGHTON.com. They can go there. They can message me through that website. Also, links for the book are there. It comes out April 15th, and that's to coincide with the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon.
Okay.
And so we kind of targeted that date, the publisher and I, to try to make a splash there if we can.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, you can find it there. You can get it through the publisher, Casemate Publishers, or you can get it from Amazon as well. So if you Google "Born from War," and my name, then it basically pops up from there.
Okay.
But yeah, that's it, sir.
Wonderful, man. This has been great. Thank you so much for your story. Thank you for your time. It's always good to be kind of in a local region, so it's
Right.
good to connect with you here. So, yeah, man, best of luck with the release and everything else. I appreciate it.
No, I appreciate your time, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.